The harsh summer sun beat down on Zara Reed's tear-streaked face as the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving her standing alone in the dusty main street of Lyndon, Kansas, with nothing but a small valise, the clothes on her back, and a child growing in her womb that her fiancé had called a burden he never agreed to bear. It was June 1875, and Zara had never felt more alone in her 22 years of life. She watched until the stagecoach disappeared into the shimmering heat waves on the horizon, carrying away Thomas Whitfield, the man who had promised her the world only to abandon her when she needed him most. 3 days of travel from St. Louis had culminated in this final betrayal when Thomas had slipped away during their meal stop, leaving her with nothing but a hastily scrawled note and barely enough money for a week's lodging. Zara's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, hidden beneath the folds of her travel-worn blue cotton dress. 4 months pregnant and abandoned in a town where not a single soul knew her name. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than the merciless Kansas sun. "Madam, you all right there?" The deep voice startled her. Zara turned to find herself looking up at a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see concern in his eyes. "I'm fine," she lied, hastily wiping away her tears with the back of her gloved hand. Pride was all she had left, and she clung to it desperately. The stranger studied her for a moment, taking in her city clothes, the small valise at her feet, and the obvious distress on her face despite her attempt to hide it. "Name's Quinn Ryder," he said, tipping his hat. "Sheriff of Lyndon, you look like you could use some help, miss." "Reed." "Zara Reed." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I've just arrived, but my traveling companion decided to continue on without me." Sheriff Ryder's expression darkened slightly. "Left you stranded, more like." His keen eyes missed nothing, and Zara felt suddenly transparent under his gaze. "I have money for lodging," she said quickly, desperate to maintain some dignity. "I just need directions to a respectable boarding house." Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his full height at least 6'2", with broad shoulders and a frame hardened by years of work. He wasn't dressed like the flashy gamblers or dandies she'd seen in St. Louis. His clothes were practical denim trousers, a simple cotton shirt, leather vest, and boots worn smooth with age and use. The sheriff's badge on his chest caught the sunlight. "Mrs. Abernathy runs the only boarding house in town," he said. "Good woman, fair prices. I can take you there if you'd like." Zara hesitated, torn between her desperate need for help and the wariness that life had taught her. Trust had cost her dearly with Thomas. "That's very kind, but no strings attached, Miss Reed," Quinn said, seeming to read her thoughts. "It's my job to look after folks in this town, newcomers included." Something in his straightforward manner eased her anxiety. Quinn Ryder didn't seem like the type of man who dealt in false promises or hidden agendas. After the smooth talkers and silver-tongued charmers she'd known in St. Louis, his directness was refreshingly simple. "Thank you, Sheriff. I would appreciate that." Quinn tied his horse to a nearby post and picked up her valise before she could protest. "It's not far. 2 blocks up, 1 over." As they walked, Zara became acutely aware of curious glances from townsfolk. Lyndon was the sort of place where newcomers didn't go unnoticed. "Been traveling long?" Quinn asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. 3 days from St. Louis." "St. Louis?" His eyebrows rose. "That's a fair piece from here. What brings you to Lyndon?" The question she'd been dreading. Zara swallowed hard. "A new beginning," she said simply, hoping he wouldn't press further. Quinn seemed to sense her reluctance. "Well, Lyndon's a good place for that. Small but decent folks mostly. We've got a general store, blacksmith, church, saloon, usual trappings of a town this size. Dr. Pearson visits twice a month from Topeka unless there's an emergency." The mention of a doctor made Zara's heart skip. She would need one in the coming months, but that was a worry for another day. They turned onto a quieter street lined with modest homes. Quinn stopped before a 2-story white clapboard house with a neat front garden and a wide porch. A hand-painted sign read Abernathy Boarding House. "Here we are," he said, setting down her valise. "Mrs. Abernathy's fair but particular about her rules. No men above the first floor, no liquor, no coming in after 9 o'clock without prior arrangement." "That sounds perfectly suitable," Zara said, relieved. Such strictness would provide the respectability she desperately needed. Quinn knocked on the door, which opened to reveal a plump woman with silver-streaked auburn hair and keen blue eyes. She wore a spotless apron over a practical brown dress. "Sheriff Ryder," she greeted him, then turned her assessing gaze to Zara. "And who might this be, Mrs. Abernathy? This is Miss Zara Reed, newly arrived from St. Louis. She's in need of lodging." The woman's sharp eyes took in everything: Zara's travel-worn appearance, her lack of a wedding band, and the absence of a chaperone or family member. "Miss Reed," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Are you planning a long stay in Lyndon?" Zara lifted her chin slightly. "I'm not certain yet, Mrs. Abernathy. I would like to secure lodging for at least 2 weeks while I consider my options." Mrs. Abernathy hesitated, and Zara could practically see the questions and suspicions forming behind those shrewd blue eyes. "Miss Reed's traveling companion continued on unexpectedly," Quinn said, his deep voice carrying a subtle authority. "I've taken it upon myself to ensure she finds suitable accommodations." Something unspoken passed between the sheriff and the boarding house owner. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "I do have one room available, top floor, back corner, $5 a week, includes breakfast and supper." It was more than Zara had hoped to pay, but she nodded. "That would be fine, thank you." "Come in then," Mrs. Abernathy stepped aside. "I'll show you up," Zara turned to Quinn. "Thank you for your assistance, Sheriff. Just doing my job, Miss Reed." He tipped his hat again. "If you need anything else, my office is just down from where we met, next to the bank. Can't miss it." As he turned to leave, Zara felt a strange reluctance to see him go. In a town full of strangers, Sheriff Quinn Ryder was the only person who had shown her any kindness without judgment. "Sheriff," she called impulsively. He turned back. "Thank you, truly." He nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Welcome to Lyndon, Miss Reed." The room was small but clean: a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small chest of drawers, and a chair by the window that overlooked the backyard. After Mrs. Abernathy left her with a terse reminder that supper would be served at 6 sharp, Zara sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Everything she had planned, everything she had hoped for, had crumbled to dust. Thomas had been so charming, so convincing with his talk of starting anew in the West, away from the constraints of society and family expectations. But when she had told him about the baby, his true character had revealed itself. First came the accusations, then the reluctant agreement to do right by her, and finally, this ultimate betrayal, abandoning her in a strange town with barely enough money to last a month. Zara wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. Self-pity would not feed her or her child. She needed to find work, and quickly. Her skills were limited. She could read and write well, play the piano passably, and manage a household, but those were hardly marketable talents in a frontier town. After washing her face and changing into her second-best dress, a simple gray cotton with minimal bustle, Zara made her way downstairs. Mrs. Abernathy was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with forceful efficiency. "Mrs. Abernathy," Zara began, "I was wondering if you know of any employment opportunities in town. I find myself in need of work." The older woman paused, flour dusting her forearms. "What sort of work are you qualified for?" "I'm educated. I can read, write, and keep accounts." "I've managed a household before," she hesitated. "I'm a quick learner and not afraid of hard work." Mrs. Abernathy studied her for a long moment. "The school teacher left 2 months ago to get married. Town council's been looking for a replacement. Might be worth inquiring about." Hope fluttered in Zara's chest. Teaching would be perfect, respectable, and not too physically demanding as her pregnancy progressed. "Who should I speak with?" Mayor Hargrove. His office is above the general store. Mrs. Abernathy returned to her bread. But I should warn you, Miss Reed, small towns have long memories and little patience for secrets. Whatever you're running from, it'll catch up eventually. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not running from anything illegal or immoral, Mrs. Abernathy. The older woman's expression softened slightly. Didn't say you were, child, just giving fair warning. Lyndon's good people mostly, but they're cautious with newcomers, especially those who arrive under unusual circumstances. I understand. Zara straightened her shoulders. Thank you for the information about the teaching position. The general store was busy when Zara arrived. She navigated through customers examining bolts of fabric and barrels of flour, making her way to a narrow staircase at the back. At the top was a door with a frosted glass panel labeled Mayor's Office. Her knock was answered by a portly man in his 50s with mutton chop whiskers and a receding hairline. Mayor Hargrove listened to her inquiry with skeptical eyes, invited her to sit, and proceeded to question her thoroughly about her education and experience. Miss Reed, while your credentials seem adequate, I must point out that we typically hire teachers for a full term. Our school session begins in September and runs through May. I understand, Mayor Hargrove. I'm prepared to commit to the full term, he frowned. And may I ask what brings a young, unmarried woman to Lyndon? We're hardly on the main routes west. Zara had prepared for this. Family circumstances in St. Louis became difficult after my father's passing. I decided a fresh start would be best. I had heard Lyndon was a respectable community with opportunities for those willing to work hard. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her father had died 2 years ago, leaving her dependent on an aunt who had made it clear that Zara was a burden. That situation had made Thomas's courtship and promises all the more appealing. Mayor Hargrove seemed partially satisfied. The position pays $30 a month. School runs 6 days a week, though Saturday is only a half day. You'd be responsible for all grades from primer to 8th. Town provides the schoolhouse and basic supplies, but you'd be expected to maintain order and cleanliness. That sounds reasonable, Zara said, hope rising. The school board would need to approve your appointment. We meet next Tuesday evening. He scrutinized her again. I must emphasize, Miss Reed, that our teacher is expected to exemplify moral character for our children. Any hint of impropriety would not be tolerated. The weight of her secret pressed heavily on Zara. In a few months, her condition would be impossible to hide, but by then, perhaps she could fabricate a story about a husband who had died suddenly. It was a desperate plan, but she had few options. I understand completely, Mayor Hargrove. I assure you that moral character is something I value deeply. As she left the mayor's office, Zara felt both relief and anxiety. If she secured the teaching position, she would have income and a respectable place in the community, at least temporarily. But her time was limited before questions would arise about her expanding waistline. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with someone on the sidewalk outside the general store. "Whoa there," came a familiar deep voice. Sheriff Ryder steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Miss Reed." "Getting acquainted with the town, Sheriff." "Yes, I was just speaking with Mayor Hargrove about the teaching position." Interest sparked in his eyes. "Are you a teacher then?" "I was a governess for 2 years in St. Louis," she explained. "The mayor seems cautiously interested, pending approval from the school board." Quinn nodded. "They're particular about who shapes young minds, but we're desperate for a teacher. The children have been running wild for months." His casual use of "we" caught her attention. "Do you have children in the school, Sheriff?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, madam, no children, but I take an interest in the town's welfare." Something in his tone suggested a deeper story, but Zara didn't pry. They all had their secrets. "I should return to the boarding house," she said. "Mrs. Abernathy was quite clear about punctuality for meals. "May I walk with you? I'm headed that direction." Zara hesitated only briefly before nodding. As they walked side by side, she became aware of curious glances from townspeople. The sheriff escorting the new woman in town would certainly fuel gossip. Don't mind them, Quinn said quietly, noticing her discomfort. News travels fast in Lyndon. By supper, they'll have you married off to half the eligible bachelors in town. Despite everything, Zara laughed. Is that how it works here? Pretty much. When you've got only 400 souls in town, entertainment comes in the form of speculation about your neighbors. And what about you, Sheriff? Do they speculate about you as well? A wry smile touched his lips. They did when I first came. 7 years later, they've mostly given up. I'm a known quantity now, dependable, predictable Quinn Ryder. Is that how you see yourself? His eyes met hers, and Zara was struck by their color, a deep green flecked with gold, unexpected in his weathered face. Most days, he said simply. Other days, he shrugged. We all have our stories, Miss Reed. They had reached the boarding house. Zara turned to face him, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. There was something comforting about Sheriff Ryder's presence, a steadiness that made her feel less adrift. Thank you again for your kindness today, Sheriff. It's meant more than you know. He studied her for a moment. Lyndon can be a good place to start over, Miss Reed. Whatever you're leaving behind, well, folks here judge you more on what you do than what you've done. His words hit unexpectedly close to her fears. I hope that's true. Get settled in. Come by my office tomorrow if you'd like. I can introduce you to some people who might be on that school board, might help your chances. I would appreciate that. As Quinn tipped his hat and turned to leave, Zara felt a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. Sheriff Ryder seemed genuinely kind, but experience had taught her that men's kindness often came with expectations. Still, she needed allies in this town, and Quinn Ryder seemed a better prospect than most. That night, after a quiet supper with Mrs. Abernathy and 2 other boarders' elderly sisters, who peppered her with questions she deftly deflected, Zara lay in her narrow bed contemplating her future. Her hand rested on her stomach where her child grew, oblivious to their precarious situation. We'll make it work, she whispered to the darkness. Somehow. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Zara dressed carefully in her best day dress, navy blue with white piping that emphasized her still slender waist. After breakfast, she made her way to the sheriff's office, heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Quinn looked up from his desk when she entered, surprise giving way to a warm smile. Miss Reed, good morning. Sheriff, I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. He stood, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Just catching up on paperwork. Benefit of a peaceful town, lots of time for writing reports about nothing much happening. Zara smiled, settling into the offered chair. You mentioned introducing me to some school board members. Yes. Quinn leaned against his desk. The board meets at the church after services on Sunday. If you attend, I could introduce you then. Might make a better impression than formal meetings. Church, of course. In a town like Lyndon, church attendance would be expected, particularly for someone seeking the teaching position. That would be helpful, thank you. Quinn studied her for a moment. You know, there's another position that might interest you, at least temporarily. Josiah Bennett at the Mercantile mentioned needing help with his accounts and correspondence. His eyes aren't what they used to be. The Mercantile, Zara considered this. I could certainly handle bookkeeping. Might be good to have something while you wait for the school board's decision. I could introduce you now if you'd like. 20 minutes later, Zara found herself in the back office of Bennett's Mercantile, demonstrating her handwriting and arithmetic skills for a gruff but kind-eyed older man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Your penmanship is exceptional, Miss Reed, Mr. Bennett said, examining the sample letter she'd written. And you understand double-entry bookkeeping? Yes, sir. My father was an accountant. He insisted I learn properly. 3 afternoons a week would do it, I think. $1.50 a day. Would that suit? Relief washed over Zara. It wasn't much, but it would extend her meager savings. That would be perfect, Mr. Bennett. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow afternoon, if you're able. 1 o'clock until the store closes at 5. As they left the Mercantile, Quinn looked pleased. That's a good start. Bennett's well respected in town. His good opinion will count for something with the school board. I can't thank you enough, Sheriff. You've been extraordinarily helpful to a complete stranger. Something flickered in his eyes. Let's just say I know what it's like to arrive in a new place with nothing but determination and hope. Before Zara could respond, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A wagon had pulled up outside the doctor's office, and a man was carrying a limp child in his arms, a woman following behind, clearly distraught. Quinn's expression changed instantly. "Excuse me," he said, already moving toward the scene. Zara followed, concern overriding propriety. What happened? Quinn asked as they reached the small crowd gathering outside the doctor's office. "Fell from the hayloft," the man explained, his face ashen. "Hit her head, she's breathing, but she won't wake up." The child was a girl of perhaps 7 or 8, pale and still in her father's arms. "Dr. Pearson isn't due until next week," someone in the crowd said. Quinn made a swift decision. "Mrs. Turner, go fetch Mrs. Wilcox. She's delivered half the babies in this county and set more broken bones than the doctor." As the woman hurried off, Quinn helped the father carry the child into the doctor's office. Zara hesitated only briefly before following. Inside, they laid the girl on an examination table. "Is there anything I can do?" Zara asked. Quinn looked at her, assessing. "Do you have any medical knowledge?" "Some. My mother was often ill. I learned to assist with her care." He nodded. "Help me clean this head wound so we can see how bad it is." For the next hour, Zara worked alongside Quinn and then Mrs. Wilcox, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, to treat the injured child. The head wound required stitches, which Mrs. Wilcox handled with practiced efficiency. When the girl finally regained consciousness, her parents' relief was palpable. "Thank you," the mother said, gripping Zara's hand. "I'm Emily Mason. This is my husband Robert and our daughter Lily." "Zara Reed," she replied, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the blood staining her cuffs. "I'm glad I could help. Miss Reed is new in town," Quinn explained. "She's going to be helping Mr. Bennett at the Mercantile, and she's applied for the teaching position." Robert Mason's eyebrows rose. "The teaching position? Well, you've certainly got my vote on the school board after today." The unexpected endorsement caught Zara by surprise. "You're on the school board, Vice President," he confirmed. "And after seeing how calm and capable you were with Lily, I'd say you've got the right temperament for handling a roomful of children." As they left the doctor's office, Zara felt Quinn's eyes on her. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're full of surprises, Miss Reed," he said. "Most city ladies would have swooned at the sight of blood, not rolled up their sleeves and gotten to work." "I'm not most city ladies," she replied simply. "No," he agreed, something like admiration in his voice. "You certainly aren't." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Afternoons at the Mercantile provided Zara with much-needed income and introduced her to many townspeople. Mornings were spent preparing lesson plans for the school term, operating on the hopeful assumption that she would secure the position. News of her assistance with Lily Mason spread quickly through town, earning her curious but increasingly friendly glances. On Sunday, Zara attended services at Lyndon's small but well-maintained church. Quinn met her outside, looking different in his Sunday best, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and a crisp white shirt that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. "Miss Reed," he greeted her. "You look lovely." She had worn her best dress, a pale blue silk that she'd brought for special occasions. It was more fashionable than practical, with a slightly more generous cut that she hoped would serve her well in the coming months. "Thank you, Sheriff. You clean up rather nicely yourself." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "Hardly ever wear this getup. Feels like I'm playing dress-up." They entered the church together, and Quinn guided her to a pew near the front. Throughout the service, Zara was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the quiet strength of him. It was distracting in a way she hadn't expected. After the service, as promised, Quinn introduced her to the remaining school board members. By the time they left the churchyard, Zara felt cautiously optimistic about her prospects. "I think that went well," Quinn said as they walked back toward the boarding house. "Parker and William seemed impressed with your educational background." "I hope so," Zara replied. "The teaching position would be ideal." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Quinn spoke again. "Some of us are having dinner at the hotel restaurant today. Nothing fancy, just a Sunday tradition. Would you care to join us?" Zara hesitated. Dining in public with Quinn and others would further establish her in the community, but it also meant more questions, more potential for slips that might reveal her condition. "Who is us, exactly?" she asked. "Doc Pearson's in town today, so he'll be there." "Probably the Masons, maybe Judge Willis if his gout isn't acting up. Mrs. Wilcox sometimes joins us." It sounded harmless enough, and the presence of other women would keep gossip at bay. "I'd be delighted," she said. The hotel restaurant was the finest dining establishment in Lyndon, which wasn't saying much. Still, the tablecloths were clean, the silverware polished, and the food better than Zara had expected. She found herself seated between Quinn and Emily Mason, with Robert Mason, Dr. Pearson, and Mrs. Wilcox completing their party. Conversation flowed easily, much of it centered on town matters that gave Zara insight into her new community. She noticed how the others deferred to Quinn on questions of public safety and order, and how he in turn sought their opinions and expertise on various matters. There was a natural respect among them that spoke of long association and shared experiences. "Miss Reed," Dr. Pearson said during a lull in conversation, "Sheriff Ryder tells me you handled yourself admirably during little Lily's accident." "I only did what was needed," Zara demurred. "Mrs. Wilcox deserves the credit for her treatment." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilcox interjected. "You knew exactly what to do to clean and prepare that wound. Where did you learn such skills?" "My mother was ill for many years," Zara explained. "I learned out of necessity." "Well, you have a natural aptitude," the doctor said. "If you ever tire of teaching, you might consider nursing. We're desperately short of trained medical help in these parts." The conversation moved on, but Zara caught Quinn watching her with that same thoughtful expression she'd noticed before, as if he were trying to reconcile the composed young woman at the dinner table with the desperate one he'd first encountered on the street. As the meal concluded, Robert Mason raised his water glass. "To our newest neighbor, Miss Reed, may Lyndon prove a welcoming home." The others echoed the sentiment, and Zara felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. "Your kindness has meant more than you know." Outside the hotel, Quinn offered to walk her back to the boarding house. The evening was pleasantly cool after the heat of the day, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie grasses. "You've made quite an impression," Quinn observed. "The Masons sing your praises to anyone who'll listen. Bennett says you've organized his accounts better in a week than his previous clerk did in a year. And Mrs. Wilcox, who rarely approves of anyone, actually nodded when your name was mentioned at church." Zara laughed softly. "I'm just trying to find my place here." "I'd say you're succeeding," he paused. "The school board meets tomorrow evening. Word is they're likely to offer you the position." Joy and anxiety warred within her. That would be wonderful. They had reached the boarding house. Quinn hesitated, then said, "Would you care to take a walk tomorrow evening? I could let you know the board's decision." The invitation surprised her. "A walk? Just along the creek path. It's pretty at sunset." He cleared his throat. "Unless you'd rather not, of course." Zara studied him in the fading light. Over the past week, she'd come to respect Quinn Ryder's straightforward manner and quiet competence. He'd shown her nothing but kindness with no apparent ulterior motive. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thank you." A smile transformed his serious face. "I'll come by around 7 then." That night, as Zara prepared for bed, she caught herself humming softly a habit she'd lost months ago when the reality of her situation had set in. The thought of walking with Quinn brought a warmth to her chest that both comforted and frightened her. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for anyone, no matter how kind or trustworthy they seemed. In a few months, her secret would be impossible to hide, and no respectable man, certainly not the town sheriff, would want anything to do with an unwed mother. Still, she allowed herself this small anticipation, this brief respite from worry. Tomorrow evening, she would walk by the creek with Quinn Ryder and pretend, just for a while, that her future wasn't precariously balanced on a foundation of half-truths and desperate hopes. Monday passed in a blur of activity at the mercantile. Mr. Bennett had entrusted her with reorganizing his entire inventory system, a task that kept her mind occupied and away from thoughts of both her pregnancy and her impending walk with Quinn. At 6:30, she returned to the boarding house to freshen up. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look when Zara mentioned she would be taking a walk with the sheriff, but made no comment beyond a reminder about returning before 9. Quinn arrived precisely at 7, looking slightly nervous as he waited on the porch. He'd changed from his work clothes into clean trousers and a fresh shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "Miss Reed," he greeted her, hat in hand, "you look lovely." She had changed into a simple muslin dress in a soft green that brought out the gold in her brown eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff, and thank you for the invitation." "Quinn," he said as they set off, "if we're walking out together, seems right you should use my given name." The phrase "walking out together" carried implications that made Zara's cheeks warm. Where she came from, it suggested courtship, not merely friendship. "Quinn," she agreed, testing the name, "and you must call me Zara," he nodded, a pleased expression crossing his face. "Zara, it's unusual." "Pretty?" "My mother had a fondness for exotic names. My sisters are Sophia and Olivia, much more conventional." "You have sisters. Are you close?" It was the first personal question he'd asked her, and Zara found herself wanting to answer honestly. "We were once." "Sophia is 5 years older, married with 3 children in Chicago. Olivia is 3 years younger, still living with my aunt in St. Louis." "But not you." "No," she hesitated. "After my father died, things became difficult. My aunt made it clear I was an unwelcome burden. When I had the opportunity to leave, I took it. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely false either. They had reached the creek path, a narrow trail that followed a meandering stream on the edge of town. The setting sun cast golden light through the cottonwood trees, creating dappled patterns on the ground. "It's beautiful," Zara said, grateful for the chance to change the subject. "It is." Quinn gestured to a fallen log beside the path. "Shall we sit for a moment?" Once settled, he cleared his throat. "I have news. The school board met earlier than planned. They've offered you the position starting August 1st to give you time to prepare before the term begins in September." Zara's hand flew to her mouth. "Truly, truly." Robert Mason was quite persuasive, apparently. Said any woman who could keep her head during a crisis like you did would have no trouble managing a roomful of children. Relief and joy washed over her, temporarily overwhelming her worries about the future. "Oh, Quinn, that's wonderful news." Without thinking, she reached out and squeezed his hand. The moment their skin touched, a current seemed to pass between them. Quinn's eyes widened slightly, and Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks as she withdrew her hand. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I was overcome with excitement." "Don't apologize," Quinn said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'm glad you're happy." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle sound of the creek and the evening calls of birds. "May I ask you something?" Quinn said finally. Zara tensed, fearing personal questions she couldn't answer honestly. "Of course. How did you really come to Lyndon? I know it wasn't a planned destination." The directness of the question caught her off guard. "What makes you say that?" "No one chooses Lyndon as a destination, Zara. We're not on any main routes. People end up here by accident, by necessity, or because they're running from something." She looked down at her hands, considering her response. "Which were you?" A sad smile touched his lips. "All 3, I suppose. I was a Union soldier. After the war, I drifted west, had some trouble in Wichita, moved on. My horse went lame outside Lyndon. While I waited for him to heal, the previous sheriff was killed in a robbery. Town council was desperate. I had experience keeping order from the army. It just happened. His honesty deserved something in return. I was abandoned here, Zara admitted. The man I was traveling with. He left me while the stage coach stopped for lunch. I had nowhere else to go, no money for further travel. Quinn's jaw tightened. This man, was he your husband? No. The word came out barely above a whisper. I see. His expression remained carefully neutral, but Zara thought she detected disappointment in his eyes. He was my fiancé, she added quickly, though it was a generous description of Thomas's reluctant proposal after learning of her condition. We were to be married when we reached Denver. And he just left you here, with no explanation, Zara laughed bitterly. Oh, he left an explanation. A note saying he'd made a mistake, that he wasn't ready for the responsibilities of marriage and that I'd be better off finding my own way. Quinn's expression darkened. The man's a coward. Yes, she agreed, but perhaps it's better to learn that before marriage than after. They sat in silence for a moment. Zara could feel Quinn struggling with something, perhaps deciding whether to press for more details. Lyndon's been good to me, he said finally. Gave me a chance when I needed one, a purpose, a home. He turned to face her directly. It could be that for you too, Zara, a fresh start. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache. If only it could be that simple. I hope so, she said softly. As they walked back toward town, Quinn kept a respectful distance. But Zara was acutely aware of his presence, solid, dependable, honest in a way Thomas never had been. She found herself wishing, for the first time, that she had met someone like Quinn before Thomas, before her life had become so complicated. But wishes were useless things, and Zara had learned long ago that a woman must make her own way in the world, regardless of circumstances. Quinn Ryder might be kind, but his kindness wouldn't extend to accepting an unwed mother and another man's child. No matter how much she might come to care for him, that reality couldn't be changed. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Zara had known in a long time. She continued working at the Mercantile while preparing for the school term. The small schoolhouse on the edge of town became her haven, a place where she arranged desks, organized books, and planned lessons for the 30-some children who would soon be in her care. Quinn often found reasons to stop by, sometimes bringing supplies from town, other times simply checking that she had everything she needed. Their friendship deepened through these casual encounters and occasional evening walks. Zara found herself looking forward to his visits, even as she reminded herself that nothing permanent could come of their growing attachment. By mid-July, Zara's condition was becoming harder to conceal. Though still not obvious to casual observers, she had begun to wear looser dresses and had discreetly let out some of her clothing. Mrs. Abernathy, sharp-eyed as ever, had given her several searching looks but had said nothing. On a particularly hot afternoon, Zara was working at the schoolhouse when dizziness suddenly overcame her. She gripped the edge of her desk, waiting for the feeling to pass. When it didn't, she made her way unsteadily to the chair. The sound of footsteps on the wooden porch startled her. Quinn appeared in the doorway, his expression changing from greeting to concern in an instant. "Zara, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she said automatically. "Just a little light-headed from the heat." He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her chair. "You're white as a sheet." His cool hand touched her forehead. "No fever, but you're clammy. When did you eat last?" "Breakfast," she admitted. "I was too busy to stop for lunch." Quinn's frown deepened. "In this heat? That's not like you, Zara." Before she could protest, he'd lifted her into his arms and was carrying her toward the door. "Quinn, what are you doing? Put me down this instant." "Taking you to Dr. Pearson. He's in town today." "I don't need a doctor," she insisted, panic rising. "I just need water and something to eat." "Please, Quinn?" Something in her voice must have convinced him. He hesitated, then changed direction toward the small kitchen area at the back of the schoolhouse where a water pump had been installed. "At least let me get you some water then," he said, setting her gently on a chair. As Quinn pumped water into a cup, Zara tried to calm her racing heart. A doctor would immediately recognize her condition. Her carefully constructed new life would crumble in an instant. Quinn returned with the water and watched as she sipped it slowly. The color gradually returned to her cheeks. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She attempted a reassuring smile. "Really, it was just the heat and missing lunch. I'm fine now." He didn't look convinced. "I'm taking you home. No arguments." Too weak to protest effectively, Zara allowed Quinn to help her back to the boarding house. Mrs. Abernathy took one look at them and ushered Zara upstairs to her room, returning moments later with a tray containing bread, cheese, and cold chicken. "Eat," she ordered. "Then rest. Dr. Pearson will be by to check on you later." "That's not necessary," Zara said quickly. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "Child, I've been watching you these past weeks. I know." Zara froze, the piece of bread halfway to her mouth. "Know what?" The older woman sighed and sat on the edge of the bed. "I raised 5 children of my own. I know the signs. How far along are you?" Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, half from relief at finally having someone to confide in, half from fear of the consequences. "Almost 5 months," Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "The father that would be the man who abandoned you here." "Yes," Zara whispered. "Does Sheriff Ryder know?" "No." "And he can't, Mrs. Abernathy, please. He's been so kind, so helpful. If he knew." "If he knew, he'd still be kind and helpful," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "That man has been looking at you like you hung the moon since the day you arrived. Your condition wouldn't change that." Zara shook her head, wiping away tears. "You don't understand. I've finally found a place here, the teaching position, respect in the community. Once they know, it will all disappear. Unwed mothers don't teach children." Mrs. Abernathy considered this. "You could claim to be a widow. Say your husband died on the journey west. With no marriage certificate, no proof, and what about the timing? I'm due in November. Even if I claimed to be a recent widow, people would count the months." The older woman sighed. "You can't hide it much longer, child. Another month at most before even the blind will notice." "I know," Zara's voice broke. I needed time to save money to make plans." "What plans can you make? Once the baby comes, you'll need help somewhere to live." "I thought perhaps I could find work in a larger town where no one knows me, or go back east. My sister in Chicago might take me in." Mrs. Abernathy's expression was skeptical. "With a newborn, traveling alone, that's no plan, girl, that's desperation." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Abernathy rose to answer it, exchanging low words with someone in the hallway before returning. "That was the sheriff. Wanted to check on you. I told him you're resting comfortably and don't need the doctor." "Thank you," Zara said gratefully. "Don't thank me yet." Mrs. Abernathy's tone was stern but not unkind. "I won't lie for you long term. You need to make decisions, and soon." After she left, Zara lay back on her pillow, one hand resting on the small but distinct swell of her stomach. Mrs. Abernathy was right. She needed a real plan, not just vague hopes and desperate measures. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different reality, one where she could tell Quinn the truth, where he would understand and still look at her with that warmth in his eyes, where she could stay in Lyndon and raise her child in this community that had begun to feel like home. But that was a fantasy. In the real world, her options were few and her time was running out. The next day, Zara returned to work at the Mercantile, brushing aside Mr. Bennett's concerns with assurances that she had simply overexerted herself in the heat. Quinn stopped by mid-afternoon, his eyes searching her face with worry. "You look better," he said. "Got some color back." "I'm perfectly fine," she insisted. "It was foolish of me to skip lunch on such a hot day." Quinn hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Zara, if there's something wrong, something you're not saying, I hope you know you can trust me." The sincerity in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. "I know," she managed, "but truly there's nothing to worry about." He didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. "I've got to ride out to the Parker Farm dispute over a property line. I'll be back tomorrow. Promise me you'll take it easy." "I promise," she said, touched by his concern. After Quinn left, Zara threw herself into her work with renewed determination. Each dollar she earned brought her marginally closer to some kind of security for herself and her child. But Mrs. Abernathy's questions haunted her. What was her plan, really? Where would she go when her condition could no longer be hidden? That evening, as Zara sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset, Emily Mason and her daughter Lily approached. "Miss Reed," Lily called, running ahead of her mother. "Look what I made for you." She proudly presented a small bouquet of wildflowers. "They're beautiful, Lily, thank you." Zara accepted the flowers with a smile. Emily settled beside Zara on the porch swing. "Robert and I were hoping you might join us for supper tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just family dinner." "That's very kind," Zara began, "but no buts," Emily said firmly. "You've been working too hard. Between the mercantile and preparing for the school term, you barely take time for yourself. Besides, Lily has been begging to show you her new kitten." Unable to refuse the hopeful expression on Lily's face, Zara agreed. "I'd be delighted." The Mason home was a comfortable two-story farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Dinner was simple but delicious roast chicken, fresh vegetables from their garden, and a berry pie that Lily proudly announced she had helped make. After the meal, Robert took a pipe onto the porch while Emily insisted Zara help her with tea in the kitchen, sending Lily upstairs to prepare her kitten for a formal introduction. "You've become quite popular in Lyndon," Emily commented as she set the kettle to boil. "Mrs. Wilcox says you're the most sensible young woman to come through here in years." Zara smiled, arranging teacups on a tray. "Mrs. Wilcox is very kind, and Sheriff Ryder." Emily gave her a meaningful look. "He seems to find many reasons to be wherever you happen to be." Heat rose to Zara's cheeks. "We're friends, MMM." Emily's expression was knowing. "Friends, yes, the same way Robert and I were friends for 6 months before he proposed." "It's not like that," Zara protested weakly. "Quinn Sheriff Ryder has been helpful because I'm new in town, nothing more." Emily's eyebrows rose at Zara's use of Quinn's first name. "If you say so, but I've known Quinn Ryder for 7 years and I've never seen him look at any woman the way he looks at you." Zara's heart constricted painfully. "Even if that were true, it doesn't matter. There are circumstances that would make any attachment between us impossible." Something in her tone must have alerted Emily. The older woman studied her face intently. "Zara," she said gently, "whatever these circumstances are, they can't be as insurmountable as you believe. Quinn is a good man. Understanding, compassionate." "Not that compassionate," Zara murmured. "No man is." Emily was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "You know, when Robert and I were first married, we lived in a small town in Iowa. There was a young woman there, unmarried, who found herself in a difficult situation. The town turned against her, all except one man, the local blacksmith. He married her, raised that child as his own. They have 5 children now and are among the most respected families in the community." Zara stared at her, comprehension dawning. "Mrs. Mason." "I'm not prying," Emily said quickly. "And I'm not judging. I just want you to know that not all men, not all communities are as narrow-minded as you might fear." Before Zara could respond, Lily's footsteps thundered down the stairs. "Miss Reed, come see Buttons." With a last meaningful look, Emily picked up the tea tray. "We'd better go see this famous kitten before Lily bursts with excitement." The evening proceeded pleasantly, but Zara's mind was elsewhere. Emily's story had planted a dangerous seed of hope, one that Zara was afraid to nurture. Could Quinn possibly be so understanding? And even if he was, would it be fair to burden him with another man's child, with the scandal that would inevitably follow? As Robert Mason walked her back to the boarding house later that evening, he seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Miss Reed," he finally said, "I hope you won't think me forward, but Emily and I have noticed you seem troubled lately. If there's anything we can do to help, anything at all, I hope you'll let us know." Zara was touched by the sincere offer. "You've both been very kind, Mr. Mason." "More than you know. Lyndon looks after its own," he said simply, "and you've become one of us now." His words stayed with her long into the night, one of them. For the first time since her father died, Zara felt she belonged somewhere. The thought of losing that, of leaving Lyndon and the people who had welcomed her, was more painful than she had expected. The next morning brought cloudy skies and the promise of rain, a rare and welcome event in the summer heat. Zara was at the schoolhouse, finalizing her classroom arrangements, when the sound of horses outside drew her attention. Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, followed by another man Zara didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened at the sight of Quinn, as it always did these days, but his expression was unusually serious. "Zara," he greeted her, removing his hat. "This is Marshal James Cooper from Topeka. He's looking for information about a man named Thomas Whitfield." The blood drained from Zara's face. "Thomas," Marshal Cooper stepped forward. "Yes, madam, I understand Mr. Whitfield may have passed through Lyndon recently, possibly in your company." Zara's mind raced. What had Thomas done? Was she implicated somehow? Quinn's eyes never left her face, concern evident in his gaze. "The marshal just has a few questions, Zara. Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about. If officials were tracking Thomas, they would uncover their relationship and, by extension, her condition. The story would spread through Lyndon like wildfire. "Please, sit down," she managed, gesturing to the student desks. It was absurd, watching two grown men fold themselves into seats designed for children, but Zara was grateful for the momentary distraction as she collected her thoughts. "What has Mr. Whitfield done?" she asked. Marshal Cooper pulled a notebook from his jacket. "He's wanted for fraud and theft in St. Louis. Apparently, he convinced several investors to put money into a non-existent mining venture. When they started asking questions, he disappeared along with nearly $10,000. Zara felt sick. "I had no idea. You traveled with him from St. Louis, correct?" The marshal's tone was professional, not accusatory, but Zara still felt herself flush. "Yes, we were." She glanced at Quinn, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "We were engaged to be married. He was taking me to Denver, where he claimed to have business interests. And he left you here in Lyndon." "Yes, without warning, he simply didn't return to the stagecoach after we stopped for lunch." The marshal made notes. "Did he say anything about where he might be headed? Any plans beyond Denver?" Zara shook her head. "No, he spoke of Denver as our destination, that's all I knew." "And the money? Did you ever see large sums of cash or documents related to his business dealings?" "No, nothing like that." Thomas had kept his financial affairs private, something Zara had attributed to gentlemanly discretion rather than criminal secrecy. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes. Through it all, Quinn remained silent, his eyes rarely leaving Zara's face. She couldn't read his expression, and that frightened her more than the marshal's questions. Finally, Marshal Cooper closed his notebook. "Thank you, Miss Reed, you've been helpful. If you recall anything else, or if Whitfield attempts to contact you, please inform Sheriff Ryder immediately." "Of course," Zara agreed. After the marshal left to continue his inquiries at the stagecoach office, Quinn remained. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. "You never mentioned your fiancé was named Thomas Whitfield," he said finally. "You never asked," Zara replied, a defensive edge in her voice. "It wasn't something I wanted to discuss." "I understand that." Quinn stood, moving to the window to watch rain begin to fall. "Did you know about the fraud?" "No." The vehemence in her voice made him turn. "Do you think I would have agreed to marry a criminal? That I would have left everything behind to follow a thief across the country?" Quinn's expression softened. "No, I don't think that. I think you're an honest woman who was deceived by a dishonest man." Relief washed over her. "Thank you for believing me." "I do believe you, Zara," he hesitated. "But I also think there's more you're not telling me. Has been since the day we met." Her heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment she could tell him everything, risk everything, or continue the deception until it inevitably unraveled. "Quinn," she began, her voice barely audible over the increasing patter of rain on the roof. "There is something I've been afraid to tell anyone here." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Whatever it is, you can tell me." The words were on the tip of her tongue when the schoolhouse door burst open. A breathless young boy stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat. "Sheriff, come quick. There's a fight at the saloon, guns drawn." Quinn's expression changed instantly. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Zara. "This conversation isn't over. Will you be at the boarding house later?" She nodded mutely. "I'll come by after I handle this." He squeezed her hand briefly. "Whatever it is, Zara, we'll figure it out." Then he was gone, following the boy into the rain, leaving Zara alone with the weight of her unspoken confession. The rain intensified throughout the afternoon, turning the streets of Lyndon to mud and keeping most residents indoors. Zara returned to the boarding house, pacing her small room as she rehearsed what she would say to Quinn when he came. By supper time, he still hadn't appeared. Mrs. Abernathy informed her that the saloon fight had escalated into a larger disturbance involving several cowboys from a nearby ranch. Quinn and his deputy had their hands full restoring order. "Likely be late before he's free," she said, studying Zara's anxious expression. "Something you need to tell him?" "Yes," Zara admitted. "Something I should have told him weeks ago." The older woman nodded approvingly. "About time. That man deserves honesty from you." Night fell, and still Quinn didn't come. Zara sat by her window, watching the rain, her courage ebbing with each passing hour. Perhaps it was a sign and opportunity to reconsider her impulsive decision to confess. Just after 9, when Zara had nearly given up, a knock came at the boarding house door. She hurried to the top of the stairs, listening as Mrs. Abernathy answered. "Sheriff," she heard the landlady say, "you look like you've been dragged through a creek backward." "Feel like it too," came Quinn's weary response. "Is Miss Reed still awake?" "Upstairs. I'll send her down to the parlor. You're not fit to be traipsing through my clean hallways in that state." Moments later, Mrs. Abernathy appeared at Zara's door. "He's waiting in the parlor." "Looks exhausted, poor man. Been keeping the peace while half the county tried to tear itself apart in my brother's saloon." She fixed Zara with a stern look. "Tell him, tonight, no more delays." Zara found Quinn standing by the fireplace, his clothes still damp from the rain, a bruise forming on his cheekbone. He looked up when she entered, his eyes warming despite his obvious fatigue. "Zara," he straightened, wincing slightly. "I'm sorry it's so late. Are you hurt?" She asked, moving closer to examine the bruise. "Nothing serious. Caught an elbow during a scuffle." He captured her hand as it hovered near his face. "You were going to tell me something at the schoolhouse before we were interrupted." Zara took a deep breath. There was no delicate way to say it, no gradual approach that would soften the impact. "I'm going to have a baby." The words hung in the air between them. Quinn's expression shifted from surprise to understanding to something Zara couldn't quite read. "Thomas Whitfield's child," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Quinn released her hand and moved away slightly, processing the information. "How far along?" 5 months. The baby will come in November," he nodded slowly. "That's why you nearly fainted at the schoolhouse, not just the heat." "Yes." "And why you've been wearing looser dresses. Why you've seemed worried despite settling in well here." "Yes." He turned to face her fully. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Zara?" The hurt in his voice was worse than anger would have been. "I was afraid." Afraid of losing the teaching position, afraid of being forced to leave Lyndon, afraid of. She hesitated. "Afraid of losing your good opinion." "My good opinion." Quinn ran a hand through his damp hair. "Zara, do you think so little of me? That I judge you harshly for being deceived by a man who's deceived many others? That I'd turn my back on you when you need help most? It's not just about you," she tried to explain. "It's about the town, the school board, the parents. An unwed mother can't teach children, Quinn. You know that." He was quiet for a long moment. "What was your plan then? Were you going to leave before the baby came? Go somewhere no one knows you?" Zara nodded miserably. "I thought, maybe Chicago where my sister lives, or somewhere else where I could claim to be a widow. And everything you've built here, your position, your friendships, your place in this community, you'd just walk away from all of that. What choice do I have?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. I want this baby, Quinn. Despite everything, despite how it came to be, this child is innocent. Mine to love and protect. If that means starting over somewhere else, then that's what I'll do. Quinn moved closer, his expression softening. Zara, listen to me. You don't have to face this alone. There are people here who care about you, who would stand by you. You can't know that, she whispered. I know the Masons would. I suspect Mrs. Abernathy already does, and He took her hands in his. I care for you, Zara, more than I thought possible after knowing someone such a short time. Hope and fear warred within her. Quinn, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. His green eyes held her steadily. Not out of pity or duty, but because these past weeks with you have been the happiest I've known in years. Because the thought of you leaving Lyndon feels like losing something precious I've only just found. Zara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. What exactly are you offering, Quinn? He took a deep breath. Marriage, a home, a family for your child. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. I'm not Thomas Whitfield. I don't make promises lightly or without understanding what they mean. I know we haven't known each other long, but I know enough. You're strong, kind, intelligent. You face challenges head-on. You've created a place for yourself here through hard work and genuine goodness. And the baby, Zara pressed. A child that isn't yours would be mine in every way that matters, Quinn said firmly. I grew up without a father, Zara. I know what that's like. I wouldn't wish it on any child, especially not yours. Tears flowed freely now. Why would you do this? Take on someone else's responsibility. Quinn's expression was tender as he wiped away her tears with his thumb. Because it stopped being someone else's responsibility the moment Thomas Whitfield abandoned you. Because I believe a man's character is measured by how he treats those who need him most. And because, he hesitated briefly, because I'm falling in love with you, Zara Reed. Have been since the day you stood in that dusty street, too proud to admit you needed help but too practical to refuse it when offered. A sob escaped her. Quinn, you don't have to say anything now, he assured her quickly. Take time to think about it. Talk to Mrs. Abernathy, to Emily Mason if you'd like. This isn't a decision to make hastily. Zara shook her head, a watery smile breaking through her tears. I don't need time. I've been falling in love with you too, Quinn Ryder. Every day, with every kindness, every conversation, every moment I've spent with you. I just never dared hope you might feel the same, might accept me and my child. Quinn's face lit with a joy that transformed his features. Is that a yes, then? You'll marry me? Yes, Zara whispered. If you're certain, truly certain, then yes. In answer, Quinn drew her gently into his arms and kissed her, a kiss tender with promise and fierce with protection, a kiss that spoke of a future neither of them had dared imagine until this moment. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I should probably speak with Mrs. Abernathy, make our courtship official, Zara laughed softly. I think she's been expecting this conversation since the day you brought me to her doorstep. Smart woman, Quinn murmured. Saw what was coming before I did. In that moment, with Quinn's arms around her and the sound of rain on the roof, Zara felt the weight of months of fear and uncertainty lift from her shoulders. There would be challenges ahead: the town's reaction to their hasty marriage, the inevitable gossip when her child arrived sooner than expected after their wedding, the adjustments of building a life together. But for the first time since learning of her pregnancy, Zara felt hope, not the desperate kind that clung to unlikely possibilities, but the solid, sustaining hope that came from knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Quinn and Zara were married 2 weeks later in Lyndon's small church, with Mrs. Abernathy, the Masons, and a handful of other friends in attendance. Quinn had bought a modest house on the edge of town, 2 bedrooms, a cozy parlor, and a kitchen with real glass windows that caught the morning light. As summer turned to fall, Zara continued teaching, her growing condition now an open secret in town. There had been some raised eyebrows and whispered conversations when Quinn had announced their engagement so soon after Zara's arrival, and a few knowing looks when her pregnancy became evident. But to Zara's surprise, the community largely accepted the situation with pragmatic kindness. "Folks understand that life is complicated," Robert Mason explained when Zara expressed her amazement at the town's acceptance. "Out here, we judge people more on what they do than what's happened to them. You're a good teacher, Quinn's a respected sheriff, and you both contribute to this community. That counts for more than old-fashioned notions about propriety." In late October, as Zara's due date approached, Quinn converted their spare bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and accepting Mrs. Wilcox's gift of hand-sewn baby clothes with a quiet pride that brought tears to Zara's eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "A home, a wife, a child on the way. After the war, I figured I'd live and die alone." Zara leaned against him, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "I never thought I'd find someone who could look past my mistakes, see me for who I truly am." "Not mistakes," Quinn corrected gently. "Circumstances. And this child," he smiled as a strong kick pressed against his palm, "this child is no mistake. He or she is exactly where they're meant to be." On a cold November morning, with the first dusting of snow on the ground, Zara went into labor. Mrs. Wilcox and Emily Mason attended her, while Quinn paced anxiously in the parlor. After 6 hours of labor, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. When Quinn was finally allowed into the bedroom, he approached the bed with an expression of wonder. Zara watched, exhausted but radiant, as he looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms. "Quinn, meet your son," she said softly. "I thought we might name him James, after your father." Quinn's eyes filled with tears as he carefully took the baby. "James Quinn Ryder," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Perfect." As Quinn held his son, for that was how he thought of the child, without qualification or reservation, Zara felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. Thomas Whitfield had abandoned her, thinking to leave her with nothing but shame and hardship. Instead, he had unknowingly set her on a path to genuine love, to a family stronger and truer than anything she could have imagined. In the years that followed, the Ryder family thrived in Lyndon. Zara continued teaching until their second child, a daughter they named Hope, was born 2 years after James. Quinn remained sheriff, respected and well-liked throughout the county. When James was 5, the town elected Quinn mayor, a position that allowed him more regular hours and fewer dangerous confrontations. As for Thomas Whitfield, Marshal Cooper eventually tracked him to San Francisco, where he was arrested and returned to St. Louis to face charges. The news barely caused a ripple in the Ryder's life. Thomas was a chapter long closed, relevant only as the unwitting agent who had brought Zara to Lyndon, to Quinn, to the life she was meant to live. On James's 6th birthday, as family and friends gathered in the Ryder's expanded home to celebrate, Quinn found Zara standing alone on the porch, watching the sunset with a pensive expression. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Zara leaned back against his chest, smiling. "I was thinking about that first day in Lyndon, standing in the street watching the stagecoach disappear, feeling like my life was over." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now I know it was just beginning." She turned in his arms to face him. "I never thanked you properly, you know." "For what?" "For seeing me. Not just a woman in trouble, not just someone to help, but me, Zara. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Quinn's smile was tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I saw you because you were impossible not to see. Strong, proud, determined. The woman who would become the heart of my home, the mother of my children, the love of my life." From inside came the sounds of laughter, James and his friends playing, Hope toddling after them, their friends and neighbors sharing food and conversation. The family Quinn had promised her that rainy night in Mrs. Abernathy's parlor, the community that had embraced her despite her uncertain beginnings. "We should go back inside," Zara said. They'll be wanting to cut the cake soon. Quinn nodded but didn't release her. In a minute. First, he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that, even after 6 years, still made her heart race. I love you, Zara Ryder, today, tomorrow, always. And I love you, she whispered against his lips. My sheriff, my husband, my home. Hand in hand, they rejoined their guests, their family. The life they had built together from the unlikeliest of beginnings, a pregnant woman abandoned in a town of strangers, and the cowboy who had made her family in a town of friends.